Hi everyone. So this is our initial lecture on Billy Ray Belcourt's A History of My Brief Body. I do want to apologize for getting this up late. I'm sure you can tell I'm sick. Um, and my son was sent home from daycare because a worker at the daycare has COVID. So we've been on self-imposed, I guess, like lockdown for 2 weeks. So I am running behind in work just because it's hard to get a lot of work done with a rambunctious 3-year-old. And also, of course, we've both been sick. So all of that as a way of explaining and apologizing. The objectives for this lecture are a biography. I've given you a bio from Billy Ray Belcourt's official website. Also, he is Cree, so and I know we've talked about the Cree before, but again, I'm just giving you information of the Cree Nation from the Canadian Encyclopedia, and he comes from the Drift Pile Cree Nation. So I've also given you just a little bit of information from their website. And then I thought that we would talk just a little about the book and also look at just the beginning, the dedication, opening quotes, author's note, preface, and the introduction. So of course I am not going to read this out to you, but this is from his biography from his website. And he's quite renowned, is the first Indigenous Rhodes Scholar, has won the Pierre Elliott Trudeau funding while at, I believe, the University of Alberta. He is currently employed as an assistant professor in creative writing program at the University of British Columbia. And this, A History of My Brief Body, is his third book. He's quite young for a memoir, which explains how this third book doesn't kind of follow the normal parameters of a memoir. I think a lot of that has to do with not only his writing style, but the fact that he is young. And what else can I say about him? He is an amazing writer. So this is information about the Cree Nation from the Canadian Encyclopedia. Um, we have gone over this before. Nonetheless, I think it's important to draw your attention to it again. By all means, you know how to pause and you know how to read. So I'm not going to read this to you. Also, there is some information, of course, from the Drift Pile Cree Nation. The photo is from the the not I don't believe it's technically on the reserve, but it's near it, and it's just on the shores of Lesser Slave Lake. And of course the the nation's flag, and of course, you know, I'm very fond of maps. So Billy Ray Belcourt is the youngest winner also of the prestigious Griffin Poetry Prize. Here in his memoir, he reimagines the form and structure of what I think we've probably come to think of the form and the structure of a memoir. It's not linear. It's not like I was born and this is the life I've led up to this point. He instead kind of documents memories, encounters, reflections, and dreams in forms that range from short paragraphs to lists to longer expositions. Uh, Sometimes it's been, and he has himself called it, a collection of essays. Being an academic, the scholar's rigor is noticeable, even when describing his intimate encounters. His writing is just layered in complexity. So this is a personal book about the person, about Billy Ray Belcourt. And Belcourt looks and forces us to look at his loneliness. The personal is clearly political. And he also asks us to look at his intimate encounters and how they are anxiety ridden, euphoric, and a space where even our race cannot be undone, as he draws our attention to dating white men who engage with him through a lens of artificial and kind of self-conscious colorblindness, or that are kind of an exotic fetishization. He considers points at which his humanity is denied, and in contrast to these dehumanizing retellings, Belcourt insists upon freeing himself from the white gaze and examines the carefully constructed life and writing about a life without commodifying identity. For example, he writes, "To my mind, one of the most vital modalities of decolonial life is that of remaining unaddressable to a settler public that feasts on our misery. Most of the time, writing a book seems incompatible with this." His memoir reveals the enduring effect of colonialism on the entirety of those who aren't Indigenous in Canada. The weight of colonialism is, as Belcourt asserts, pervasive and present emotionally, mentally, and physically. And I think that he uncovers how colonialism infiltrates Indigenous people's lives, just even at the level of the ordinary, just the day-to-day existence. He writes how colonialism must be resisted despite and because of its persistent presence in the past and in the present. He also imagines a future um, outside of it. His dedication is to those for whom utopia is a rallying call. So I'm just going to give us some context there because I think this is, like most of his writing, very layered. So the term or the concept of utopia was created by Thomas More. Thomas More was born in 1478 and was an enemy of Henry the King Henry VIII's Protestant Reformation in England. Thomas More is Catholic or was Catholic and is a Catholic martyr. He was beheaded by King Henry VIII. So what we know most for, um, even outside of his beheading by a king, is the invention of the concept of utopia. This is actually what he is really famous for. He coined the term to describe his concept of an island community with an ideal mode of government. So his book, Utopia, was first published in Latin in 1571 or 1517. 1517. Sorry, you guys. And it, of course, was titled Utopia. Utopia in Greek means no place. In part, More's book Utopia was an attempt to cling to quite a medieval ideal of a life of contemplation, kind of almost like a monk's life, with a very kind of socialized government. Today, currently, utopia is defined as an imagined place or a state of things in which everything is perfect. I'm not sure if that's how Belcourt is thinking of it as a perfect state. I don't, I'm going to say I don't think that's what he's meaning in his dedication. Because he used the term rallying call, I came across an article in Spaces of Utopia and Dystopia, Landscaping the Contemporary City. It was published in 2002, written by Gordon MacLeod, no relation to me, and Kevin Ward, or no relation that I'm aware of. And they write in his, meaning David Harvey, in David Harvey's rallying call to envision possibilities for a more equitable, just, and ecologically sustainable urban future, David Harvey contends that most of what passes for city planning has been inspired by utopian modes of thought. So, in the same article, doing research for this book led me down some odd places. But according to Teresa Caldera, the motivation behind this form of utopia was clear. And she writes, the erasure of social difference and creation of equality in the rational city of the future. So I think there's a lot in there that I think Billy Ray Belcourt's actually talking about. He's saying to those people that, to those for whom utopia is a rallying call, who want to erase social difference, who want to create equality, who want a rational nation and future. The paper goes on to discuss solidarity rather than segregation, and to address the exclusion and restriction felt within all social groups, and points out the segregation by race and income of, because it's an American article, African Americans and Latinos. Here in Canada, the Indigenous, of course. They go on to point out that many cities have become punctuated with gated high security communities, shadow governments, and restrictions designed to enhance property values. So I'm suggesting that his dedication is gesturing towards the way that nations are designed and segregated in and outside of cities, and that a utopia, a place, a city, whatever, must include equality, sustainability, the erasure of social difference, and solidarity rather than segregation. So, in this way, his dedication is in itself a rallying call, a call to action, a call to resistance, towards a different kind of Canada, perhaps a Canada that can emerge through reconciliation. His opening quotes are from Ethical Loneliness, The Injustice of Not Being Heard, and Maggie Nelson's, which is a beautiful book, Bluets. And I think that they encompass a lot of themes within his own, this book and his work in general. The first quote, of course, as you can read, is failure to hear will matter to those who do not listen and those who are not heard. Not only because stories without an audience do not survive, but also because being heard or ignored impacts how the past resonates in the present. This quote really encompasses the work involved in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada, the need for the people involved and those students, those residential students, heard and unheard. And I mean, if they were unheard, I think that is, my apologies. I had to put on Peppa Pig for my son. I'm sorry, I don't want to start this again, but I don't remember what I was saying. Uh, in essence, I believe this first quote really addresses the work encompassed in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. All of those who witnessed, who are involved, that need to be heard, because being heard or ignored impacts how the past resonates in the present. The second quote, from Maggie Nelson, I am not interested in longing to live in a world in which I already live. And again, to me, that really goes back, and he continually goes back to this notion of a better world, a utopia. His author's note is very short, and it is an explanation. And he is explaining that he is choosing ambiguity over like truth. Veracity is another word for truth. And that he's indicating names and identifying features have been altered. And also, he's indicating that he has marshaled, as he says, the forces of poetry and theory to weave not a linear story, which memoir typically denotes, but rather a series of stories and analytical scenes into a composite that exceeds the boundaries of my individual life. So he's telling us he has taken liberties of poetry, theory, and ambiguity. Um, his preface, Letter to Nocum, I'm going to refer to an article I read. It's actually a conversation between Ruth Lefebvre with Billy Ray Belcourt, and she published it in 22 in The Rumpus, an online magazine, and it's called Zones of Paradox: A Conversation with Billy Ray Belcourt. And in this kind of like interview, Belcourt says of the preface, and I'm quoting, "The letter began 2 years before the book did. I wrote an early version of it for an address at a celebration of First Nations, Métis, and Inuk graduates at the University of Alberta. I left the task of writing the address until the morning of, and it wasn't until then that I realized the only wisdom I had to offer my peers had to do with unconditional love, and that it was now our job to go out into the world and love and be loved. And to talk about love, I had to talk about my kokum. Before I sent the manuscript to my agent, I snuck the letter in there, and it fit nicely." He continues to say, and I'm quoting, "From her, and her, he means his grandmother. From her, I learned how to write toward dignity." So, and then I've given you a quote just at the beginning of the letter, which is really, I think it does help a lot to frame the book, this preface. I'm going to talk about just the Cree language briefly. Um, Nocum, translated from Plains Cree, which Billy Ray Belcourt speaks, as does my family. Plains Cree Nocum means my grandmother. That no part of Nocum is a prefix that denotes my. Kokum means your grandmother. If you were to say his or her grandmother, you would say Okum. So I've just come across a lot of people referring to Billy Ray Belcourt's grandmother as Kokum, which is obviously they don't understand Cree. And a lot of current or younger generation of Cree, even my generation is often guilty of this. They will often refer to um, their grandmother as Kokum, just because they've grown up hearing, you know, native Cree speakers saying Kokum, and they just naturally call their grandmother Kokum, not realizing that it's actually grammatically incorrect. Anyway, I'm sorry for the ramble on the Cree language. Um, his introduction, particularly towards the end, and it's not very long, but it brings us back to his dedication. So he returns to this dedication in numerous ways throughout the text. He writes, and I'm quoting, "Join me in the ruins of the Museum of Political Depression, with hints of a world to come everywhere we are and have been. a red utopia is on the horizon. Um, and I'm going to say this with far too many exclamation marks for my liking. As you all are probably plainly aware by now, for I continually suggest you delete them in your own writing, it's really important to say right now, in case you may have forgotten, it is your writing, and you are welcome to use whatever punctuation mark that pleases you. Even, imagine my heavy sigh, the exclamation mark, which I really think should always be avoided, except in like text messages. But back to his introduction. And of course, he, as I'm saying, he returns to this idea, this concept of utopia more than once, and he writes in the way he frames capital N, capital E, capital N. Indians enact a form of geographic escape that is still unfolding. We need to write against the unwritability of utopia. This means that joy is somewhat of an impossible desire when our sorrow is multiplied as long as daily life continues unimpeded. That we experience joy, however, that we can identify it, if only belatedly, illuminates the dead end toward which the settler state hurls. So we can see, even in these two sections, he is seeing the end of the white settler state, nation state of Canada. And he is seeing the beginning of a utopia for the Indigenous people, which I think is really exciting in that it's so positive and so affirming. His seeking and searching and announcing a new beginning with Canada for Indigenous people, but I really believe by extension for all Canadians. It is really wonderful to read in place of often those words that have had to be spoken, so as to be remembered, so as to be acknowledged. Without that previous really painful work, I'm going to assert that Belcourt probably couldn't write his own work. Maybe without all those previous words of pain and struggle, not that he doesn't have his own, but that turmoil, maybe he couldn't, as he writes, walk upside down on the ceiling of the museum. The image is from the Museum of Vancouver, and it's from their show. It ended at the end of January, but the show was called Acts of Resistance, and it featured work from Indigenous artists such as Ocean Highland, Brandon Gabriel, Ed Archie, Noisecat, Will George, Marissa Nahani. Sorry, I'm trying to remember all of them. Ronnie, Dean Harris, and Jackie Fawn. It featured a whole series of these kind of banners. I don't know why I'm saying kind of, they are banners. And they were really evocative and really, really beautiful. You can all still see it online. There's a virtual, you can move through it virtually if you're so inclined. So thank you very much just for this beginning lecture. I don't know if I'm going to post another one this week just because it is the middle of the week and I'm hoping to get this posted this evening. I'll try to get, I don't know if just because I just don't feel well and I'm still behind on marking. Sorry guys, I'm kind of rambling now. So this is probably it for this week for this lecture. But we'll get into the book, like the actual book in and of itself, this coming week. I do want to, just because Billy Ray Belcourt really started me thinking about museums and artifacts and what's housed in museums and I just kept thinking about the two totem poles that are housed at the British Museum, and please, I really, really love the British Museum. I don't like the two totem poles. These two totem poles, and I'm referring, of course, I'm sure you can discern this image here, this photograph. These two are on permanent display. They're from, as you can imagine, the Haida people, and I'm using the British Museum's language here. They were acquired in 1903. Um, many many people in Britain and many British scholars often write and say that there are, by the way, 16 totem poles that have been acquired. One was gifted, but the rest were acquired from Canada's First Nations people, mostly in the early, but some in the mid 19th century. They were acquired by, and I'm quoting a British scholar, collectors and dealers from abandoned villages or disintegrating communities in the earlier years of European settlement. Um, one of the 16 is a gift to the Queen from Canada in 1958, and that one's located, if you go to London and you're interested, it's located in the Windsor Great Park. This image here on the bottom is this totem pole that's facing away from the canal is in Hertfordshire. It's on the grounds of a private housing estate, which again makes us think a lot of utopia and segregation. Um, and it's in Berkhamsted. Um, so, if you have any spare time, you can always write to the Prime Minister of Britain and ask that they return Canada's totem poles, other than that one we gave the Queen. They can keep that one. I'm going to end on a quote from Billy Ray Belcourt. Poets pledge allegiance to a country I don't believe in. The fundamental violence of colonialism, then, is perhaps the inculcated sense, a sensation that bubbles up most acutely by way of the physiological, that your body is not yours to keep, but it is never solely yours to maintain sovereign control over. And of course, a history of my brief body is about the body. Um, so thank you. Thank you very much. And I hope you are all doing well. And I will see you, you know what I mean. I'll see you next week, whatever that means right now. Okay, thanks. Bye.